Welcome to the Busy Latter-day Saint, where righteous desires and living life come together. Here, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints discuss their challenges and successes in studying the Scriptures. I'm your host, Richard Bernard. The music for this program is by Marvin Goldstein and used with his permission. If you have enjoyed this podcast, I encourage you to comment on this episode or the podcast in general. To leave a comment, click on the link in the show notes. Because I'm not posting a weekly episode, I encourage you to subscribe to the podcast to be informed when a new episode has been posted. You subscribe by tapping on the subscribe or follow button. Each podcast app is different, so if you don't see the follow or subscribe button, a simple Google search will show you how. This episode is the first in many ways. The hardest part of having a podcast with guests is, finding a guest that are willing to be on the podcast. I'm grateful to the many listeners that have suggested guests, but many times when I contact the individuals, they do not respond or tell me they don't have the time or have nothing to share that would be of interest or ask that I reach out to them later in the year, and then when I do, they don't respond. I've come to understand why podcasts and shows that have guests have someone working full-time to schedule guests. The reason I bring this up again is because today's episode came about without me having any part in reaching out to the guest or scheduling the interview. Marcy Brown, a previous guest on this podcast, and along with Liz Thomas, the producers of the Matthew Calley Project, called me at 8 a.m. on October the 21st. She said there were two women that I should interview and that they are together in Salt Lake and will only be together until tomorrow. She then told me about Mary Ellen Elggren and Gracia Jones and a little of their history. My response was, yes, let's set it up. I asked how I can contact them, and Marcy said she would take care of it. Shortly thereafter, I received a text from Marcy giving me the time and the place of the interview, which was for the next day. This episode is also first because there was an audience during the recording. And in addition, during the recording, we had phones going off, a visitor knocking on the door, and sometimes, loud trucks going down the street. But that wasn't the worst. I later learned when starting to edit the podcast that my mic had a problem. That which became worse during the podcast. The mic was the first one that I bought when I started podcasting, and it was an inexpensive one from Best Buy. Through the miracle of technology, I was eventually able to save the tracks so that it sounds much better. Not perfect, but at least much better than what it was. The editing of this podcast has been a nightmare, and the reason that it's taken me nearly a month to publish it. I've also had other technological problems in the editing process, and I've begun to wonder if maybe someone really doesn't want this podcast to go out. Another first is while my podcasts are about studying the Scriptures, this podcast, while I did my best to steer the direction in that direction, the narrative kept coming back to the unique story of my guest, and that in the end proved to be okay, and I'm sure you will agree. But all of these first and the problem with the mic, which I have since retired and replaced with a professional brand I use for my guest, was well worth it. I had such a wonderful time with Mary Ellen and Gracia. When I arrived at Mary Ellen's home, we spent an hour talking about my mission in the Gospel Library. The interview was the longest I've ever had, and then after the recording, all of us, including the small audience, went for a late lunch and we spent hours talking about the Gospel. I didn't want to come home. In the end, I spent nearly the whole day with the small group. Mary Ellen and Gracia are two fascinating women with a wonderful story to tell. Mary Ellen is a second great-granddaughter of Brigham Young and Emily Dow Partridge, and Gracia is a direct descendant of Joseph Smith. Their story is about the hard feelings between the descendants of Brigham Young and Joseph Smith and the struggle to building a bridge between the two groups. It's a story of intrigue, tears, human nature, the involvement of an apostle and the First Presidency, and the working of the Spirit to bring peace. I thank Marcy for setting up the interview, and if you have not heard my interview with Marcy and Liz, I suggest you listen to episode 53, the Matthew Calley Project, to learn about one of the great apostles of the Lord. And now, after this long introduction, here is Mary Ellen and Gracia. Well, welcome, Mary Ellen and Gracia. I keep still wanting to say Garcia, but I'll get over that. being able to say Gracia. Welcome to the podcast, and I'm grateful to be here in your home, and this is your home, Mary Ellen's home, right?
Yes.
Okay, Mary Ellen's home here in Salt Lake, and so I'm grateful to have the time with you. Let's start off with Mary Ellen. Just give a short introduction about yourself, about family, how long you've been in the church, things like that.
Well, I was born in the church and was baptized at 8. So as I grew up and got married, I got involved in my grandmother and my mother's business, which was church history tours. My grandmother actually was the pioneer church history tour leader. She started in the 1930s. And I got involved in 1974. She died in 76, so I had 2 years with Grandma. And her name was Vida Fox Clausen, and she was an amazing person and had sold a lot of people B.H. Roberts' Comprehensive History of the Church. She made some money doing that. And then people said, we want to go look at these places. So that's how she got involved. And then I still was raising my family, so I took the tour company home and worked from my home and continued those tours over the years. And I see now that that was a lot of preparation for what was ahead of me. I needed to know the church history. I needed to know what happens when members of the church come into Kirtland and see that temple and know that the church doesn't own it. Someone else does. And in 1974, that was a shock to me how people reacted to that.
Well, what was the reaction?
Who are these people? Why do they have this temple? They didn't know. And then we come into Nauvoo, same reaction. Well, who are these people? I mean, why do they have these houses that are so important to us? And so I had to know the answers to that. Now, I had some great tour guides, and I learned so much from them. But right away, I had to understand that and be able to answer people's questions about that. So I began to learn Emma's story. And I also learned about what the Joseph Smith Sr. family had been doing to keep in touch with Emma's descendants. And I learned that one year we came in, and here was this, where there had been a field of weeds, here was this beautiful cemetery. And that they had come together, the descendants of Emma and the descendants of Hiram, and others, I guess. There were other, it's all the descendants of Joseph Smith Sr. And they put in their resources and their backs and hard labor, and they cleaned up that cemetery and beautified it together, which I thought was such an important message to give to visitors, so that they knew that these people who own these buildings, they're our people, and we love them. Yeah. And so I learned right away that when we pull up to the Kirtland Temple, I had to do a little mindset seeding. I had to say to the members of the church, now, this building does not belong to the church. It belongs to the RLDS church. At that time, that was the name. And we need to show our gratitude for their hospitality. And if they had not preserved this building, you would not be able to see it. So this is not the time to back them into the wall and convert them to the church. And so that was just an interesting thing to learn, that I had to do that. And then when we come into Nauvoo, I had to refresh that. And then people behaved themselves beautifully when they went into those places. But I was concerned at people who didn't have that preparation, because I saw what happened with those people. And very often there was somebody in the group who decided it was their job to convert these odd people who are holding these buildings. So I began to realize that there was something there that needed attention. And the members of the church needed to rethink things.
Yeah.
And about that time, my brother-in-law, who was a CES teacher, told me that he'd been in a meeting where I think it was Wayne Bricky relayed that he, on his way to his class where he was about to rip into Emma, he received a personal revelation that said, "Don't do that. No more."
Mm-hmm.
And then I heard it from another source, another person in the church education system had the same experience. And I thought, something's happening here.
Yeah.
And the members of the church, we need to learn about Emma Smith, and we need to be grateful for all she did, and we need to love her.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now we're going to get back to Emma, but your family, how many children do you have?
I have 7 children and 24 grandchildren.
24. I still got you beat. Okay. But I cheated. I had a second marriage.
Oh, no, I'm married to the same fella. My first great-grandchild will be born in December.
Oh.
So I'm quite happy about
Yeah.
that. My children, I didn't get involved with the tour company until I had 5 children.
Mm-hmm.
Then I had 2 more. And as they got old enough, I would take them on these tours.
Yeah, I was wondering if
I absolutely did, and it expanded their knowledge and understanding of not only church history but American history. Very integral part of the establishment of the church and the restoration.
Absolutely.
So that was a great blessing to my family.
I can see that. Now, obviously your children are all grown. You've got grandchildren and everything. Have you always lived here in Salt Lake, or?
I have. Well, there was one little stint in Las Vegas for a couple of years when my husband worked for Air West, but then we came back to Salt Lake.
Oh, okay. What's it like living in Las Vegas with all that heat?
And back then, air conditioning wasn't so dependable. However, I was never so cold in my life as I was one winter in Las Vegas.
Oh, really? Really? Okay. Well, that's interesting. And your husband passed?
Oh, no. My husband is the state clerk of the Bonneville Stake, and we'll be using your service for sure.
All right. Okay. Very good. All right. And what does he do?
He's an accountant, and he's also my business partner.
Oh.
So he has helped with putting tours together. And
okay.
We are retired now, and in my retirement, I became a local city guide for other tour companies.
Okay.
So that's been a great joy to me because I don't have to do all the work and the effort, and I just get on a bus and I have people undivided attention for several hours, and I introduce them to our city, and it's a lovely opportunity.
Now, you kept talking about Nauvoo and Kirkland. Do you get tours up here with the history up here at all? Here in Utah?
In Utah, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
And my husband is an officer in the Sons of Utah Pioneers.
Oh, okay.
And I am the only woman on that board ever. I am their Trek advisor.
Oh, okay.
So we do tours for the Sons of Utah Pioneers, and next year we'll be doing. We were to do last year a church history tour, but the world fell apart, and so it's scheduled for for 22.
Okay. Well, now, Gracia, let's hear about you a little bit. Let's talk about where you grew up.
I grew up in the Flathead Valley in Montana, and it's on the reservation, the Salish and Kootenai Confederated Tribes, and I'm a member of that tribe through my father.
Now, what % are you of Native American?
Very small, but enough to be a member of the tribe.
I asked that because my sister-in-law, who's deceased, had a partner, and the partner was part of a tribe in California, up in the Santa Barbara area. And because of that, they lived on the reservation, but there was a casino there. And that casino provided a nice income for everybody that was on that reservation.
Oh, yes, there are casinos on our reservation now. When I was a child, there was
there weren't
nothing.
Any. And that's really brought a lot of money into the reservation.
We have a power plant, and the Kerr Dam is the first dam on the Columbia River system.
Well, I remember being one time they pointed out the chief of the tribe, his house. And it was just like everyone else's house, but there was a Rolls Royce parked in front.
Well, we don't have anything like that.
And I thought, boy, that casino business must really be good. So you grew up on...
I grew up on a dairy farm.
Dairy farm.
And it was a great life for a kid to grow up. But we were not active in religion because we were... First of all, my parents were divided. Mm-hmm. And my father had been raised as a Catholic, and mother had been raised pretty much Protestant, but her mother is a granddaughter of Joseph Smith, and she was raised in the reorganized church tradition, mm-hmm. but never taught her children about it other than the mention of the fact.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And at what age did you start milking cows?
Oh, so probably so young I don't remember how it happened. But by 7 or 8, I could follow up after the milk machines, and they called it stripping. Okay. You stripped out the last little bit, and that's where the cream is. Okay. So it's an important job.
Yes. I'm embarrassed, but I was a young child, probably in kindergarten, and we had a field trip to a dairy. And when it came time for questions, I had a question. I said, which one gives the chocolate milk?
The black ones. Not really.
So, farming and things like that, I'm just totally don't know anything about. Since I've been in Utah, I've been learning a lot, because across from our house is various fields and everything, people in the ward, and so I start learning a little bit about farming. But it's always appealed to me. I always thought it was a great life. I understood it to be a hard life, but I think there was a lot of lessons to be learned from that type of upbringing.
Absolutely. And my father was known in the community for his great integrity and his work ethic, and innovation. No one had a well in my community, and he decided that we were going to have a bathroom. So he put in a cistern and put in a bathroom with a pressure pump, and we had a flush toilet and a tub and running water long before anyone else in our community.
Wow.
But he had to go often to get loads of water to fill the cistern. Okay. But he was that kind of man that he wanted to get those things available to his family. And then we did dig a well, and it was well over 450 feet deep. Wow. And it smelled like rotten eggs. Oh. And it had lots of minerals, and we got used to it. And I have very good teeth. Oh,
okay. Because drinking those minerals. Now, how were you on this out there in Montana your whole life? Or?
Yes. In let's see. I was trying to think the year, but it's not important. My father got injured, and we had to move into town, which was Ronan, my hometown, and left the farm. And he had a secondhand store, and we lived in the back of the secondhand store, just across from the school in Ronan. And I suppose I was in 8th grade when we did American history in school, and I had a history book, brought it home, and my mother looked in it and saw Joseph Smith's name in it, and she said, well, Joseph Smith is your great-great-grandfather, but don't you ever tell anybody. And so no explanation was given. It was just a stern statement. And so I let it go. And then a few years after that, when I was going into my senior year of high school, my family moved to eastern Montana, to a place of Ronan. Moved from Ronan to Conrad, Montana, which is not far from Great Falls. It's about 60 miles north of Great Falls, Montana. And when I got there, I needed a job to raise some money to get school clothes. And I got a job with a lady, and my mother said to me, she knew her, and she said, don't tell her you're related to Joseph Smith. She'll think you should be a Mormon. Mm. I had never heard the word Mormon. I now heard Joseph Smith's name. Again, don't tell. Mm-hmm. And I had no feeling of asking because of the stern tone of my mother's voice. So after I'd worked there a little while, the lady I worked for said, I want to tell you a beautiful story. And she told me about Joseph Smith's first vision. And it was so astonishing to me. She called him a prophet, and I didn't know what that meant. Well, when my mother said, don't tell this lady I'm going to work for that I was descendant of Joseph Smith, she set me up for curiosity, but no answers. Mm-hmm. And so when I began to work here, I'd been working for about 2 weeks, and she said to me, sit down a minute, Gracia, I want to tell you a beautiful story. And then she told me about Joseph Smith, who had a vision speaking to the Father and Son, and that he had this marvelous experience. And she said he was a prophet. And I thought a prophet was the difference between what you bought something for and what you sold it for. No idea what she was referring to in regard to a person being a prophet. And so then she explained that he was a prophet of God like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the Bible. Well, that was just astonishing to me. I knew Bible stories, especially about Abraham and Isaac and that story. So I just said, Joseph Smith is my great-great-grandfather. And of course her eyes got really big, and she was obviously excited about it. And I explained that my grandmother was a granddaughter, the youngest of 9 children born to Alexander, who was Joseph and Emma's third son. But I didn't know much about any of it at all, just the name. So I was embarrassed that I had revealed something I'd been told not to. But she was very happy about it. And a few days later she called and said, can you come over after school? The missionaries want to give you a gift. Well, I'd seen those 2 young men. They lived in her basement apartment. I hadn't met them, but I thought they were really cute. And I was 17, and I thought, yeah, I'll be there. So I went, and she had prepared them. And one of them said, we want to give you this book. It's the Book of Mormon. It was translated by the power of God by your great-great-grandfather, and it is true. And when he said that, I literally burned from the top of my head to my fingers and toes.
Wow.
And in my mind echoed the words, it's true. It's really, really true. So it was an overwhelming experience. I took the book home and began to read. Was fascinated, couldn't put it down. My dad saw me reading. He said, what's that you're reading? I said, it's the Book of Mormon. Oh, he got this look on his face, and he said, don't dig too deep. Don't dig too deep. But he did not say, don't read the book. So, of course, I continued to read the book, and I went back again to the house to work, and eventually I met the missionaries again, and I learned that they had lessons, and I wanted those lessons. I wanted to know everything about Joseph Smith, and had nothing, and didn't dare ask my family about it. And so the missionary said I had to have permission from my parents in order to have the discussions. But they were reluctant. And as teenagers will, I nagged, and I finally got permission. My dad said, just learn all you want about it, but don't get involved with those people. The feeling that they had was fear.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And at this point, I took the lessons. And then I wanted to be baptized. And my dad said, not under my roof. Not in a mean way. He was just concerned and fearful. And so I had to wait until I turned 18. And girls in 1955 and 56 had to be 18 to be of age. And so at 18 I left home.
You left home. Now,
and got married. I got married and got baptized.
Got married, and how many children did you
and
have?
I have 8 children.
8 children.
From my first marriage. And they're all grown up. And
how many grandchildren?
from my first marriage, I have 35.
35.
Then I remarried to my present husband, Ivor Jones, and he has 10 children, and I have 8 children.
Oh, my goodness.
And together we have 77
Oh,
grandchildren.
my goodness. Well,
I have 35 of my own, and he has more. So.
You certainly outdone me by quite a bit. Do you have gatherings with
We do.
everyone?
We have family reunions. When we got married, everyone came, but since then we have not had everybody in both families together in one place.
Yeah,
It's too big, too far.
Yeah, that's quite a large group to
It is.
get gathered. Yeah. What do you do for Thanksgiving?
We
Take
used
turns?
to use the steaks dinner, or yeah,
Okay.
or have it outside in St. George. You can do that in November.
Okay. Now, what does your husband do, or what did he do?
My husband worked for the Washington County School District
Oh,
and was bus mechanic, a bus driver, and eventually he trained bus drivers and even gave them their CDL license
okay.
test.
All right. Now, with Mary Ellen, obviously, your job outside of the home was tours, correct? And Gracia, did you have employment outside the home? Or?
I've been a mother at home most of my raising of children. When my youngest was actually a senior in high school, I was a church life editor for the Spectrum in St. George.
Okay.
And that was a fun job. I had written columns for newspapers up in Montana and different places I'd lived. And I was a journalist. And various occupations. I eventually wrote a book on Emma's Glory and Sacrifice, a Testimony. And that was published by Hurricane Publishing Company.
Okay.
And I worked for her, Janice DeMille. I worked for her and set type and did articles, interviews, whatever she needed me to do.
Now, Hurricane Publishers, did that gradually become Cedar Fort?
Oh no, this was Homestead Publishing,
Oh, okay.
and it was a private or little tiny company that she started and did.
The reason I asked because Cedar Fort is my publisher, but I read their history somewhere, and they were actually another name before that, and it gradually
No, we
came
weren't involved with them.
Came into Cedar Fort. All right, well, we've gotten to know you a little bit, and let's get back to Mary Ellen here. You've got some papers in front of you. I keep wondering what they're about.
Well, in 2007, I got a call from the Brigham Young family to come to a board meeting. And I said, I really don't have time to do that. And they said, we won't be long, just please come. And in that meeting, they wanted to make me the president-elect of the Family Association. And I said, I really don't have time to do that. And they said, everything is done for this year. You won't have a thing to do until next year. So with that promise, I agreed. Now that was March. In April, the secretary of the family, Kari Robinson, received an interesting request from one Michael Kennedy, who was Gracia's cousin. And at first she just didn't know what to do with it. Finally, on May 12th, she shared it with the board members. And I was now on the board. I got this message. Do you want to tell them what Michael's points were?
I can't remember exactly
Well,
what
he
his
basically was asking for the Brigham Young family to send an emissary to their reunion that was going to be in Independence and Nauvoo in June, and to bring an apology.
Wow.
A letter of apology
A written letter.
from the Brigham Young family for unkind things Brigham Young had said that had hurt Emma in her reputation with the church members out here.
Okay, I've got to ask, so what's an example of something he said that would hurt Emma?
That she was a wicked, wicked woman.
Oh, well, that's pretty bad.
And he said that to her sons.
After her son was untruthful and told him that his mother had told him something that was not true about Brigham Young. And Brigham asked him, "Your mother told you that?" Because he knew she knew better.
Okay.
And he said, "Yes," because it gave him credibility.
Okay.
And then he said,
If she
"She's
did,
wicked,
she's a wicked, wicked woman.
Okay.
I mean, you always have to put things in context.
Yeah, you got to put it in context. Absolutely. Yeah.
And they went from there with their anger, very proud of themselves for not having lost their temper in front of Brigham Young, and proceeded to pass that generation to generation of hostility toward Brigham Young.
And it always was based in some true thing. So one of the things I learned that they were upset about was during the time between Joseph's death and Brigham's return, Joseph had sent him and the 9 faithful apostles on missions. Well, not all 9 of them, because John Taylor and Willard Richards were still there. But the rest of them, he had sent them east on a mission. So it took time before Brigham even learned about the assassination, and then he still had to travel. So about 6 weeks elapsed. He didn't get back till August. The martyrdom was June 27th. And in that time span, apostates and people who wanted to grab power descended on Emma Smith and totally alienated her from Brigham Young.
And one of those was Oliver Cowdery.
No, Oliver
not
was
Oliver. Sidney Rigdon.
I'm sorry, Sidney Rigdon, yes, that's right.
And there were others. And they said things to these boys later in their life. The apostates still were in Nauvoo. And so as the boys were growing up, they said, "Don't you remember Brigham Young locked you up in your house? You were under arrest. You couldn't even go outside and play. Don't you remember that?"
And none of this was true.
Oh, it was true.
Oh, it was true.
They said, "Oh,
was
yeah, we
protection.
remember." But this is the problem. The mob, after the martyrdom, had said, "We will not leave one Smith standing."
alive.
So immediately Brigham said, "We have to protect Emma and the children." And Emma knew this. And she didn't want her children outside of the house. They were terrified because the mob was they had surrounded Nauvoo. And so there's truth, and then it gets spun against Brigham Young.
It's never in context.
Right.
Never.
Yeah.
Actually, the perceptions of these children was children are not explained. Nothing is explained to them. Mm-hmm. They simply
can't go outside and play.
Yes. And as an old man, Alexander went to the South Seas and he gave a talk in which he explained his situation, and he believed that they were under house arrest and that their mother was not even permitted to go get food or anything. Their perception was so antagonistic And see,
completely untrue
he's
at
only
that
6 years.
point.
He's only 6 years old when his father dies, so he's just a little child.
Yeah.
And his brother's only 11, and he does not comprehend.
Mm-hmm.
But they believed that actually they forced their mother was forced to leave Nauvoo by these wicked people.
And so, they had told me I didn't have to do anything. The very next month, well, May 12th, Kari gives us this communication. Please send someone and bring an apology.
Yeah.
Well, I thought, you've got to be kidding me. But right away, because of my background in coming into Nauvoo and into Kirtland, and I knew something needed attention, I thought, maybe this is an opportunity. And so I immediately wrote a letter to Dallin Oaks. He had come and spoken to the Brigham Young family and had talked about the relationship between Emma Smith and Brigham Young, and including the court records, because Emma was part of a court case against Brigham and the church, and
Well, the lawyers did that. Emma didn't.
Right.
Herself.
It was
attorneys who did
actually
that.
Her second husband got involved in that too. So it just made things worse. And he wanted us as a family to understand some of the realities of what had gone on there. Mm-hmm. And so I immediately wrote him a letter and I said, this is happening. I would love to have a copy of your talk. I need that knowledge. I need to understand what I'm dealing with here. And he wrote me back the very next day. I contacted him on the 15th, and he wrote me a letter on the 16th, sent me the points of his talk, and a letter saying, about the apology, I can't help you with that. My heart just sank.
Now,
I can't help you with that.
What was the time period? What year approximately did this occur?
It was 2007.
Okay, 2007. Mm-hmm. So Dallin Oaks obviously was a general authority.
He was an apostle.
Apostle, yeah.
And so I thought, well, what is this? And why has it been dumped in my lap? And I just couldn't figure that out. And I'm sitting there sort of scratching my head wondering what in the world to do. Mm-hmm. And my daughter stuck her head into my study door and said, what's the matter, Mom? And I told her, and she said, well, why don't you just write it? And I said, why? I have no authority. I have nothing. Why would I write? And it started to flood into my head. This document flooded into my head, and I turned to my word processor and I said, sit down, Jan, something's happening here. And I just started to type as fast as I could. I was taking dictation. And I know that it came from the people that had those problems back then. I mean, I felt Emma there. I felt Brigham there. And I felt my great-great-grandmother, Emily Partridge, there. And I knew that they needed this. So I'm typing away, and when I got done, the tears were rolling down my face. And I said, thank you, I don't know who's here, but I think this is what they need. So I immediately sent it out to the board members, sent a copy of all of it with the explanation of how it had happened.
And that's a copy of the...
This is it. And I said, I have a Texas temple tour scheduled and I'm leaving. Here it is. You decide if this is what you want or what to do with it, and I'll see you when I get back from Texas.
Now, I'm looking at the letter. It looks like you've got about 8 signatures there or something from the board.
Right.
Okay.
So the next thing that happened involved Gracia. Now, I had not met Gracia or Michael. I had not met any of these people. And I'd gone to Texas. So you went to see Michael.
Well, in preparation for our Joseph Smith Jr. first ever to be held, Joseph Smith Jr. family reunion, was going to be we were going to go to Independence and then to Nauvoo. And we were hoping to gather as many as possible of the actual descendants from everywhere to get there. And Michael was preparing and seeking direction from the Lord. And for about 6 or 8 months, unbeknownst to me, he had been trying to get a hold of the Brigham Young family.
Now, I got to interrupt. When you said
Michael Kennedy.
Oh, Michael Kennedy. Okay.
He was our president of our family organization. Okay. And he had not discussed this part with me. So I knew nothing about it. But we had been on a trip to Montana, my husband and I, and we came back, and as we were passing the road that goes off toward Alpine, where Michael and his wife and family lived, I said, let's drop in and see Mike and Darcy. And so we went there, and they were just preparing to go to the meeting that was scheduled with the Brigham Young family. You've already explained, Corey eventually told them about this, but at first she thought it was the crackpot. And then it began to dawn on her that she needed to communicate that with the Brigham Young family board. And I knew nothing about any of that because I hadn't heard even about the possibility of such an approach. And so we followed them to this is the place where the meeting was to be held. It was on the 24th of May, 2007. And we went in and we were introduced, and Michael was asked to explain what it was that was needed. And he did. He gave a little background about the hard feelings that were caused because of Brigham Young's remarks about Emma, and that the church out here had generally discarded her. So as he explained that, he said, we would like to have you send some representatives to our reunion and bring a letter of apology. And one of the men in the room...
There were 2 specific points.
Oh,
have you got them?
You know, I don't have them written here. So do you?
I don't have them.
Oh,
I wasn't in the meeting. I was in Texas.
He wanted a letter of apology, and he wanted representatives to come.
Yeah.
What were those 2 points? We had them.
I don't know. It was pretty aggressive.
His feeling was very strong that this group of descendants of Brigham Young needed to apologize for Brigham having tarnished Emma's name for the whole church forever. And when this man there heard this, he jumped up, and the spirit was gone. I mean, before that had been friendly. He jumped up, he slammed his fist. Apology, what for?
I understand. This was, I don't know, can I say, it was Bill Gibbs, and was an excellent attorney. He's since passed away. And he did the legal stuff for the Family Association, and absolutely wonderful man. But he was
mad,
offended by what Michael said.
And so when he said that,
the spirit had gone out of the room. Everybody was, what?
I said, well, apology is not the right word. What we really have to have is a bridge to bring our descendants of Emma and Joseph across to stop having this horrible feeling toward Brigham Young, and just build a bridge so that we can build friendships, so that we can move forward, because we can't bring descendants of Joseph and Emma into this church with the atmosphere against Emma in the way that it is, because they will be hurt and have been hurt because of it.
Well, I wondered how this just affected everybody, because I don't know, I'm trying to put myself in the situation that if I've been told that Brigham Young did these terrible things, how that would affect my testimony within the gospel, because he was a prophet for a long time. And I just wonder how this affected people.
Well, in the family of the prophet, he was an old devil. My grandma said, old devil, Brigham Young. Never ever said his name without wrinkling her nose. But let me finish.
Okay.
I wanted to tell you that at the minute that this happened, I said that, everything calmed, and this good man said,
Well,
listen.
what happened was Kari,
Yes.
our secretary,
That's
Kari
right,
Robinson, took that opening from Gracia and said, could I read something? And she took out this statement. And she read it, and the spirit came back in the room. And
The
after
hostility was
that,
gone.
they were able
Immediately.
to make an agreement.
Wow.
And Michael took this statement to the First Presidency, and they wanted to make a correction or two.
They wanted to leave off.
And they
the
started
apology part.
sending me, they didn't want anything that suggested an apology, actually.
They didn't edit it otherwise. They simply did not want that sentence.
The last line, which we love, actually.
And what is the last line?
Well,
you
I
need to
probably
read
ought to
whole
read
thing.
the whole thing to you.
All right.
I should have had that out. Have you got a copy that has the last line?
Well, I thought I did. I don't think so. Yeah, no. But what I wanted to tell you was, when I joined the church, I was not the first ever baptized, because Joseph baptized his son, Joseph the Third, when he was young. And a cousin had joined in Chicago, a descendant of Joseph's son, Frederick, and she never was active. She went to the reorganized church. So I came into this knowledge and was baptized on the 17th of March, 1956. And I was the first to ever go to the temple. And my mother joined 23 years after me, and she became the first descendant to serve a full-time mission for this church. And she served it in Independence.
Very good. It's wonderful. How did it feel to go to the temple? When you went to the temple the first time, was it in your mind that you were the first since Joseph Smith to be at the temple? Or
I did not know that.
Okay.
Knew nothing
So
about
at that time you didn't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't really know much about the family
Okay.
connections. But when I went to the temple, it was a big deal to the temple people that I was the first descendant, that I was to come into the temple.
Yeah.
But I really didn't know enough to impress anybody.
No, I understand. Well, Mary Ellen,
Okay, I
you've got
have
some
it.
papers here in front of you.
All right, here's the statement as it was given to me. For a century and a half, we have grieved over the loss of the fellowship of our dear Emma Hale Smith, her children, and her descendants. We feel in our hearts an abiding longing to join once again these two families in a common celebration of their ancestors, two men who loved each other and gave their lives together in the service of the Lord Jesus Christ. The prophet Joseph Smith, who stands at the head of this dispensation, is second only in our affections to the Lord himself. And we hold in the highest esteem our progenitor, Brigham Young, whose dying words in this world were the repeated name of his greatest friend and mentor, Joseph. If there are any misunderstandings that continue to exist in the lexicon of traditions in our family concerning the prophet's beloved wife, whom we revere as a truly great and saintly lady, we would commit ourselves to do whatever is needed to publish to the world our deep regard for her noble life. It would be our earnest desire to rebuild that bridge of friendship between our two families that existed not so long ago. Please accept our regrets for things past and things lost, and our hand in love and fellowship for the future, where all is to be gained.
Wow. Thank you.
So the First Presidency said the last sentence should not be part of the written apology, but you may say it orally. So that's what we did.
Oh, wow.
Now the interesting thing about this is we had no idea that these people did not know that Brigham Young and Joseph Smith were close, loving friends.
Really? Because that's what I'm a convert to the church. I was 19 at the time. But I've always heard that they were great friends.
They were.
Yeah.
I mean, Brigham was sick at one time and Joseph never left his side.
Mm-hmm.
Stayed with him every minute until he was able to get him well. Their wives, with their wives, they had dinners together. They socialized together.
Mm-hmm.
Mary Ann Angel, Brigham Young, Emma, and Joseph. They were dear, close friends. The tradition that had seeped into the descendants of Joseph and Emma was that they were bitter enemies.
And they knew nothing of the history.
Wow.
When they all had to leave Kirtland, Brigham left before, and Joseph met him at Terre Haute, Indiana, and Brigham Young arranged for them to have funds given them to finish their trip. So this friendship was absolutely solid in the families.
Yeah.
And the shame is that the loss of that friendship alienated this future generations of Joseph's descendants.
So in this document, I mean, I didn't know that they didn't know that they were close friends.
No.
But whoever gave me this information knew that this family was struggling with this. The second thing is Brigham's last words. He said them in 1877 before he died. Emma said them in 1879 before she died, and they knew that.
I hadn't heard that. I knew, if my memory serves me right, Brigham Young, his last words were Joseph, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yes.
And the same
so
thing
Emma
happened when Emma died 2 years later.
Oh, Emma died 2 years after Brigham Young?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And she said the same thing then?
Yes.
I have Alexander's story of that here. Do you want to hear it? When Alexander Hale Smith recalled that a few days before his mother's death, Emma told her nurse that Joseph had come to her in a dream or vision. At a moment she died, Emma reached out her hand and exclaimed, "Joseph, Joseph." This precious story of Emma's dream is told, and Joseph's answer. Joseph, oh, wait a minute. We did the Be Patient Emma song. That's what I'm running into here in this little thing. So skip this for a minute. Emma's dream was that Joseph came to her and said, "Come with me." And he took her into a beautiful mansion, and in that mansion was a room where there was a babe in a cradle. And Emma snatched up the baby and said, "Where are the rest of my children, Joseph?" And he said, "Be patient, Emma, and you shall have all of your children." And Emma told this to her nurse. And after she passed away, the nurse said, this is the dream that Emma had, or the vision that Emma had. And Alexander, after telling this story, said, will families be together in the hereafter? I don't know, but it fills me with a grand hope. Mm-hmm. So be patient, Emma. You will have all of your children, was the impetus for us gathering this family.
That was the theme of the reunion.
The theme of the reunion in 2007. And why Michael Kennedy was so anxious to have the Brigham Young descendants participate and bring something that would help bridge this feeling among the residue of this family was to carry forth this theme and to build that bridge. Mm-hmm. What we didn't understand then and do now is that this actually opened up, in my mind, it opened up a channel from heaven that actually hit more than the families. It actually extended far-reaching.
Yeah, we think it was a major turning point.
A feeling of reconciliation began to be promoted within the church, above and separate from anything we had done. Mm-hmm. It was a marvelous outpouring of a spirit of reconciliation.
And we began to recognize right away that there were those on the other side of the veil that were directing what we were doing.
Yeah, sure.
So, when I was in Texas, I start getting emails from my family, the board of directors, saying this is happening. Michael Kennedy has taken the statement to the First Presidency. They would like you to not include the last statement except orally, and I'm sharing all this with my passengers as we're going from temple to temple, so they were in on all this. It was really quite a remarkable thing for them. And finally they said, you have to come home. You have to go. You're the one. You have to go. And I thought, why? My goodness, we have fabulous priesthood holders at the top of this family. Why do I have to go? And they said, we don't know, but you have to go. So I had to leave my tour 2 days early in the hands of my husband and come home. There was a commitment that I was having to keep in St. George. I ran down there to do it. On the way back, I was with a friend to drop her off in Draper, and she said, oh, it's so wonderful. I've moved out here. I'm now by my chiropractor. And I said, really? What's his name? And she said, Craig Frogley. And I thought, I need a good chiropractor. I need to know that. I had never been in that part of this valley in my life. And so there was Craig Frogley. And then actually before I left Texas, while I was in San Antonio, I knew I was coming home. And I called a friend, Bruce Stewart, who was one of the best guides I ever had on the tours. And he was chairman of the committee that rewrote all the CES manuals. He's a marvelous historian. And I said, Bruce, I need you. And I told him what was happening. And I said, help me understand what's going on with this family. And he said, you need to speak to a guy named Craig Frogley. And I said, why? Well, he is the head of the Joseph Smith Sr. family. Oh. And he knows everything that's going on with the Junior family. And I said, I don't know him. I won't have time when I get home. I have to catch a plane to Independence. You need to help me. So he spent hours that night going over things with me. He referred me to Gracia's article in the Ensign, and he sent it to me so I could read it on the plane while I was flying back home. And then my friend says Craig Frogley to me as well. Something something's going on here, you know?
It's not a coincidence.
This is not a coincidence. But anyway, I didn't have time to see Craig. And so I booked a flight from Salt Lake to Independence. There was one seat left on the plane. And so I was able to grab it. And I had had almost no sleep for about 36 hours. And I thought, I'll sleep on the plane. And it was my seat was clear in the back of the plane. I walked all the way down there. It was a middle seat, and I thought, how am I going to sleep in this middle seat? The guy on the aisle stood up, let me in. I sat down, and he sat down, and now he's going to talk to me. And I thought, I desperately need sleep. And he said, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to Kansas City. He said, oh. I said, where are you going? And he said, Independence. And I said, well, I'm really going to Independence too. That's my destination. And he said, oh, my name's Craig Frogley.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
And so we had all that flight time for him to prepare me.
And let me explain something first. Craig is not the head of the Hiram Smith family. He was head of the family coordination committee. And all of us represent each of the branches of the descendants of Father and Mother Smith. And he was head of that. And as such, he honored us by coming to our little first Joseph Smith Jr. family
The next
reunion
generation's reunion.
that was being held separate from the big one with everybody there.
And he said to me, I didn't have time to go to this reunion. I was not planning on going to this reunion. And the Spirit has not let me have a moment's peace until I booked this flight. And here I am, so sitting next to you.
Wow.
So, about then I knew that I had no control over what was happening, and I needed to go with the flow.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was a pretty remarkable experience. And when I got to Independence, I was the only one. I was the Brighamite in the presence of Joseph's descendants.
Intimidated.
And I'm telling you,
fearful.
It was not a friendly environment. I was a bit nervous. They had arranged for me to stay with a family, and we went to the church on Temple Lot in Independence, and I sat there and heard this man rip my ancestor from one end to the other and say terrible things about him. And we walked out afterwards, and Sherilyn Howcroft from the church historian's office came over to me and said, how do you feel when you hear that kind of thing? And I said, well, he endured it, I guess I can. But I was mad. I was hurt.
Really?
And I went back to the place where I was staying for the night, and I was going to come home. I really was not going to stay. And then I had this book with me that had Abigail's story from the New Testament. And I had read it, and I got it out and I read it again. And Abigail risked her life to save her village, but more than that, to save King David, who was about to sack her village.
From the Old
And knelt
Testament.
before him and was humble, and she succeeded. And I thought, I'm going to do Abigail. So I stayed. And the next morning when we met back on the Temple Lot, we were going to go onto buses and go up through Iowa and over to Nauvoo. Suddenly there were two friendly faces, Kenny Mays and
Paul
Thomas Smith, both of whom had done tours for me and were good friends. And there they were. They had been asked to come and give historical information as we traveled on the bus. And I thought, thank you, Heavenly Father, two friends in the crowd. So that was an amazing thing. And we went on over to Nauvoo, and on the way over, Michael Kennedy said, we need to have a meeting. Now, by this time, Kari Robinson had flown in. She flew in time to catch that bus. And so I had now a partner. There were two of us, Brighamites, and Michael was concerned. He wanted to know exactly what we were going to say the next day. And he wanted to check it out, and he wanted to make sure that this was going to go the way he wanted it to go. And so he said, we'll meet tonight in the motel and have this meeting. And so Kari and I said, agreed. And we did do that. And this same thing repeated.
The adversary stepped in and really
The
caused
spirit
hurt.
left. We were at odds. And Kari pulled out the statement and said, could I read this? And she read it. The spirit came back. And then Michael said, we're going to the temple early tomorrow morning. Will you come with us? And we knew they were doing that. There was a member of the family that had been a member for a year and was going to get his endowments. And so we were now invited to join with them. Now, I want to tell you, the most spiritual experience I have ever had in my life was in the Nauvoo Temple on the 9th of June in 2007, a temple I thought I would never see in my lifetime. There it was, and we went in. And then as we were approaching where we were going to have the prayer circle, word was passed, we're going to the prayer circle. And we walked up there, descendants of Brigham Young, descendants of Hiram Smith, descendants of Joseph and Emma Smith, in that circle together. And you know what you have to do there?
Yeah.
You have to commit that there are no hard feelings in that circle, or you're invited to leave. The spirit just came into that room. It was unbelievable. I could not control my emotions. And we were still putting a veil over our face at that time. Pretty soon, moisture was running out of my face, down my veil. It was the most dramatic experience I've ever had. I felt those people in there around us rejoicing. Wow. That commitment made in that Nauvoo temple was the most important thing. And before we went on the session, the temple president, who was David Worthland, gave us a blessing.
In his office.
In his office. He turned his office over to us. We did a little work on the statement before it was going to be presented. And that was just, and then we went into the celestial room, and it was like it was packed. I mean, they from the other side of the veil. They were all there, and they were just, thank heavens, you know, they were rejoicing, they were singing. We could feel it, we knew.
Well, that's quite an experience, my goodness.
It was a fabulous experience. And then we went over to the Carthage jail together. Amazing experience. And then on our way back, here was a blockade in the middle of the road that was going to keep us from getting back to make our presentation. And it was unbelievable. Have we got that picture? I put the pictures away. It just totally blocked the road right up to the Mississippi River that was coming right up to the edge of the road. And we could not get past this thing. So we called into Nauvoo. They sent another bus. We had to walk down through the water, the Mississippi River, and around and get on that other bus if we were going to get there and be able to present this statement. You know, I mean, Satan has not made any of this easy.
That's right.
We have to fight our way through every time. And finally, we were able to make our statement, and it was a fabulous, and we stood up there, and by this time, Peter Kennedy, who was a descendant, a Brigham Young family descendant, had joined us. And so there were three of us. And we made our statement, and then we bore our testimonies and said, we do this out of the mouth of three witnesses so that you will know. It's a great experience. And then in September,
Well, there was about 90 descendants of Joseph
that were
and
there.
Emma. And they were of every mix, Protestants, any kind of thing, as well as reorganized Temple-Lot and our church, the LDS Church in Utah. And it was a very good representation of his living descendants present, even though it wasn't like hundreds.
Right,
it was about 90, which was huge. And they all accepted that with a vote of raising their hands. Yes.
Wow. Well, that is a marvelous experience. I just can't imagine what it was like to be there. I always wonder about Emma. I don't know a lot about her. I know there's been some books, and obviously your book about her. I always wondered why she didn't come west, and then of course she remarried. And I understand he was a good man, the second husband.
He was good, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
For his day, he was a man of his times.
Yeah. But having studied Emma's life, what are some things that you've taken away from that has helped you?
Emma learned in Kirtland that if Joseph was not present, she had no support. She could not trust even people that we would have expected to be trustworthy. She learned that then, and she wrote to him in a letter and said, I've been so treated that where you are not, I can't be protected, and her rights would not be. And so after that, after the mobbings, after all the other things that they went through, Emma didn't trust people. And after Joseph was killed, you have to understand, it's all clear to us today because we know the history. But she was living in this moment, and she did not know who Joseph meant when he said, I have enemies here in this in this place, and who was guilty of seeing to it that he was killed. She didn't really know everything that we know today.
There were apostates among, in the group.
And so she was not able ever to regain trust. And when the brethren were gone for that period of time, Parley Pete Pratt and several came in to Nauvoo ahead of time, and Emma was being hit with all of these debts, these claims, and they met with her, and they informed her that they couldn't organize. She wanted them to assign someone to be in charge of these issues, and they said, we can't do anything until the 12 are here. And they informed her that in a kind of strong way that she didn't have any business to tell them what to do. And she actually said, if you won't help, I'll take care of myself. And that was the moment of real recognition on her part that she had now her husband was gone, she had no one. And
it changed her position.
He had signed
dramatically.
Yes, he had signed over some properties to her, and so under advice of her attorney, she went to the county seat. She went and filed those documents.
Yeah.
And so when the brethren get back, that's already been done, and they were not pleased.
Now,
And it made her look like she was grabbing.
Yeah.
And she was
Brigham
not.
wanted then to help her, but the alienation had happened.
No, it hadn't completely. Not
Well,
at that stage, Mary.
He asked to have Joseph's papers to be able to take care of all these debts.
That was a little later. This when Brigham came back, and everything, he and Emma didn't have any hard feelings.
No,
at
in
all
fact, they had
until-
a dinner party.
Yeah,
And
until
Heber C.
later.
Kimball, in his autobiography,
Yeah.
talks about the dinner party where
And it
where
felt
the
like old
men
times.
served dinner to all of the Smith widows, of whom there
Yeah.
were many, and that they put towels over their arm and they made a formal service, and they laughed together and they had a wonderful time. And Heber says it was like the old times.
It felt like
all
old
the
times.
the lovely times that they'd had together, but it quickly
But later it
deteriorated.
deteriorated
Yeah.
and became
Of course, Brigham Young's
awful.
focus was on rescuing the church.
Right. Yeah.
And-
absolutely. And we got to remember the times were different as far as the rights of women and legal rights.
absolutely.
It was a real problem for
yeah,
Emma.
Yeah, it would be a very big
I
problem.
mean, I think that's why she got married again, if you really want to know.
Well, her things
she had
were-
to have
her-
a man.
Her home and everything was sold out from under her.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a auction held in her yard,
She had to buy her own things back.
and her brother-in-law, Christian Vitamin, helped, and they bought it back. And then she was able, when the dower, the state had to go through its whole thing to settle the estate,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what Elder Oaks did his thesis on.
So
was
this auction was to be able to settle the estate.
No, this auction was to pay debts.
It was one of the things. Joseph needed a boat to go across the Mississippi to Iowa because they had a lot of the people were over in Iowa, and so he needed a boat. He bought it from the federal government, and the federal government came in on Emma and wanted full payment, and they were going to
everybody else,
get it no matter what had to be done.
everybody else who had signed that note got bankruptcy. But Joseph was not allowed to have bankruptcy. And the other thing was, church could only own a certain amount of property.
Well, they applied what is called the Mortmain Law.
Yeah, that's
And that read, it was law in Illinois. It's sort of a holdover from King Henry VIII when he was taking property away from the church. No church can own more than 10 acres of property in any municipality.
So things
And
were in the
somehow
precedence.
the state laws adopted those from Great Britain as they set up the states. And sure enough, that Mortmain Law was in Illinois. And they applied it and said, you know, this church, they can't own more than 10 acres of property.
So that's why everything was in Joseph's name as president of
I
the
see,
church.
yeah.
And people don't understand that or know that. And generally, it made it look like Emma was grabbing. She wasn't. She only wanted what was hers for her children. And then members of the church, when they left, they loved her and they couldn't get any value out of their property. So they gave her
All
their
kinds of
property.
things.
So she has all this property in her name, according to the records. And she gave a lot of it to the church. But people didn't know that. Even Brigham didn't know all that. At
His
that time.
focus was on getting those people
Yeah.
across that river and out of there.
But
So-
after the fact, these things start to come out. You know, Congress actually did an act of Congress to relieve Emma of that debt,
Oh.
the steamboat debt.
Well, all this has been very interesting.
Sorry.
I could sit here all day talking to you. But I want to move a little bit in, because really the podcast, believe it or not, is about the scriptures. And so we get to know people about the scriptures. And so we'll start with Mary Ellen, because she's starting to turn to the scriptures.
All right,
The hard
Michael.
copy, I'll have to mention, it's not the Gospel Library.
It's because it's bigger type.
Are you
It's got bigger
in
type.
section 10?
But anyway,
109?
she's got a
I'm
hard
in-
copy of the scriptures
I'm
here.
in,
And I was just going to ask you, with your background and everything you know, how do you approach the scriptures? Do you find you approach them in a different way?
Well, it's the source of so much. I mean, the depth of the scriptures and what we can learn about what we should be doing is just invaluable. We have to know the scriptures, and we have to learn to read scriptural writing and meanings of words, and if we can do that, we understand a lot. This, however, is Joseph Smith, what I'm going to quote to you. And this is the dedication prayer of the Kirtland Temple. So this is like 1838. This is long before a lot of the trouble. And he says in verse 68, O Lord, remember thy servant Joseph Smith Jr. and all his afflictions and persecutions, how he has covenanted with Jehovah and vowed to thee, O mighty God of Jacob, and the commandments which thou hast given unto him, and that he has sincerely striven to do thy will. Have mercy, O Lord, upon his wife and children, that they may be exalted in thy presence and preserved by thy fostering hand. Have mercy upon all their immediate connections, that their prejudices may be broken up, and they may be converted and redeemed with Israel, and know that thou art God. He, I think, knew there was going to be trouble for his family, and that thought they needed to be encircled and loved.
Yeah.
And this came true because as we brought the families together in the gatherings, we've had family members have amazing conversions. And a lot of those are available online with our family organization. The change, the reconciliation that took place from this letter and from spreading the word about it. And we've taught the family about this, the ones that we could talk to about this. We've taught them about this. And that they would come in as a flood has been a promise, an expectation, and a hope. It's actually turned out that the fulfillment, the fulfillment of this is, be patient, Emma, and you shall have all your children. Because it is not our goal and present focus is not on conversion. It is gathering this family to come to a knowledge of who they are and why it's important that they understand their heritage and no longer be afraid to share that they're a descendant of the prophet Joseph Smith, and to be happy about it. And that's happening. It's happening across the board, whether or not they ever even want to talk to the missionaries. They're accepting and liking him.
And Gracia and Ivor have spent their whole lives traveling all over the world, gathering these people in. A bunch of Joseph's descendants live in Australia.
We went to Australia.
And they've been there. They have contacted every single descendant.
It's our home teaching route.
Yeah, I started to say that's quite an accomplishment.
It is fabulous. And
absolutely.
I want to read a quote from Gracia, because Craig Frogley quoted this from memory to me on the airplane, because I was concerned. Why is this me? Why am I doing this?
So
I have much work for women to do. It is a mother's duty to call her children, to gather and teach them. As through a woman the division came, as through a woman shall the gathering be.
That was given to me by the Spirit. And I was informed I would be as a mother to this vast family. And I have been.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
And then Craig patted me and said, "Welcome, Sister Elggren."
Gracia, we've just finishing up in the church here the year of the Doctrine and Covenants. What's it like to read the Doctrine and Covenants? And most of it is your great-great-grandfather speaking.
It speaks to me in my heart deeper and deeper. Always has since I joined the church in 1956, but increasingly. And I have to say, in this period of time that we have done Come Follow Me, the power of that has opened channels of understanding for the Doctrine and Covenants revelations that were never there before. Darcy Kennedy communicates with a group of us elderlies. Two of them are
Darcy is Michael's wife.
Darcy Kennedy. Every week we meet on the telephone, and she teaches us from the current Doctrine and Covenants and whatever section we're in at that time. We have 2 90-year-olds, 3 80-year-olds, and Darcy on the phone at once, having this class.
Wow.
I would like to say, do this. Please, people, do this. Because what President Nelson has allowed us to do is to get inside of the words, not just top of the words, not just reading them. So you've covered so many chapters. But like you're talking about, actually analyzing every word, and why is this word chosen instead of another word?
Yes, and the Gospel Library, I guess it's ad time for the Gospel Library.
Absolutely.
But I was studying it last night, and then as you go down within the Come Follow Me, there's something you can click on, and it gives you all sorts of history. It explained about mobs, what they were and why they were vigilantes. It explained about the country forming at the time. It was a fairly new country at that time.
Yes.
And they weren't sure if the states would even stay together. And so all of this is in the Gospel Library. And I spent, I think, an hour and a half just reading the history of these various things. And so the Gospel Library is a tremendous tool to get into the Doctrine and Covenants, because you're right, the time is, in the past, we just, well, let's get through this lesson. In fact, I get sad when I travel and I attend another branch or a ward, and they say, well, in fact, it just happened this last Sunday. I was visiting somewhere, and the teacher said, we've got so much to get through. And I go, no, we don't. If we just get into one scripture and really understand it, and conversion happens at that point, that's all we need to do. And besides, we're not the teacher anyway. It's the Spirit. And if we can get people to feel that Spirit and write their revelations within the Gospel Library, that's all that really matters.
It's a wonderful, wonderful tool.
Yes. Well, thank you for your time. And as I told you at the beginning, before we started the recording, I'd like to end with your testimony. So who would like to go first?
Well, I'll go first.
Okay.
My former bishop came to see me. I've had a health challenge the last year, and he came to see me, and he said to me, I need to bask in what you know, because I do know that there is a world where we are going, that we have a Father in heaven who loves us, that the Savior has made it possible for us to come here and learn, that his sacrifice is the most important thing that ever happened, and that we need to sacrifice in the same way, so that we can get back to our Father in heaven. I know the people I love who have passed through the veil are there. I was never very spiritually alive before I had this experience. I absolutely know they're there. I know they love us. I know there's something about families that we're on a team and they're pulling for us. They want us to succeed. And so I think we have to feel that, and we have to give it our best.
I taught a class at Education Week. I taught from 2001 to 2011, education weeks. And one of my classes was an unequivocal testimony of the prophet Joseph Smith. And in thinking about all of the things that I've had to learn, never having been raised to know who he was until I learned it as a teenager, came into the church as a convert, the Spirit gave me the testimony that the Book of Mormon was true and that Joseph Smith was truly a prophet all at once when the missionaries handed me that book and bore their testimony. And it's been it's over 60 years. And I do not know better today, after all my research and all my studies, that Joseph was a true prophet and that the Book of Mormon is true. I don't know better today than I knew in that instant from the Spirit, not even understanding what it was I knew. And now all these years have been added to it. And you ask about this, what do I find in the scriptures? When I would find in the Book of Mormon a reference where Jesus Christ was actually talking to the Nephites about my great-great-grandfather, I nearly fainted as I found that for myself. No one pointed it out to me. Oh my goodness. And this has been a marvelous, marvelous journey for me. Almost after the fact, through the studying of Joseph Smith and his writings and his testimonies, I have come to know my Savior, Jesus Christ, who we cannot know without this wonderful restoration. Why are there so many confusions in the world? Why are people so hostile and ready to fight? Because they do not know who their Savior really is. They know his name and they pray to him and they do things in his name. But without these restoration scriptures, we are handicapped. And here we are with this wonderful, wonderful. Joseph Smith gave more words. We're told, the Savior said, this generation will have my words through you, Joseph. And he has given us more words than almost everything else combined that has been said and given to the world about the Savior. So here we are in this, and here I am in this old age witnessing that this is really true. That Joseph Smith is a true prophet of God. The Book of Mormon is true. And I had to learn through a very awkward experience that dear Brigham Young is a great prophet of God, and that there is in my heart no doubt. I know it, and I share it. The only question I have is, have I done enough? Have I done it well enough so that everybody who ever knows me will know that testimony and that witness that I have to bear? It is really true. And I love them all, and all the prophets since, each one in their own special need and their own special time. And now with our wonderful time that we're in, there's just no doubt. No doubt. People who doubt are looking somewhere in the wrong place because they need to go to the source. And the source is the words that were given to us through the prophet Joseph Smith and through the scriptures. I testify that the Book of Mormon is true. The Doctrine and Covenants is true. The Pearl of Great Price is true. I went in the temple one day to do initiatories and got in a line of people I had to wait a really long time. And so at that time I was wrestling with some modern LDS historians who were debating about the validity of the Book of Abraham. I sat there and I read the entire Pearl of Great Price while I was waiting to do initiatories, and I got absolute certainty witness. Yes, that is true. Whatever people want to equivocate about it, I don't. It's unequivocal testimony. And I bear it in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.